Hello and welcome back to another edition of Civil Discussion on GNAT-TV. My name is Andrew McKeever. I'm the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to be with you today on Friday, April 8th with my co-host, Don Keelan. Don, good to have you back again.
Same here. Glad to be back.
All right. We're here for another edition of our program, which we began back last fall, I guess it was, where we talk about civil discourse and civil discussion. We've all noticed, I think, over the past couple of years that that seems to be something that seems to be a vanishing asset. Let's just say some of us seem to be having greater and greater difficulties talking to each other in a civil and rational sort of fashion. So we started this program to kind of talk about ways that we can discuss policy issues and ideological viewpoints, where we might not always agree with the person we're talking to, but to find ways that we can do that in a way that kind of, hopefully enlightens both sides by the time the conversation is over. We started our program doing a couple of editions that basically focused on techniques of civil discourse, the importance of listening to another person, trying to kind of look at things from their perspective, not so much from the standpoint that you're going to wind up agreeing with what that person may be saying, but at least come away with a better understanding of where they're coming from and just sort of a different perspective on whatever it is you may be talking about. So we started off doing a bit of that. We've also now begun to kind of get into applying those techniques into certain specific policy areas. And today, we're going to be discussing one of those, basically under the, I guess you could say, energy and environment rubric. And towards that end, we're really pleased to have with us today Representative Laura Sabilia, who's the state representative from Dover, Searsburg, Wardsboro, Stamford, Somerset, and Reedsboro. Representative Sabilia, thank you very much for making the time to be with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. Love the civil discourse effort. Fantastic. Thank you.
Representative Sabilia is also the vice chair of the House Committee on Energy and Technology, so we thought that she'd be a great person to have along with us today to talk about the clean heat standard that's under discussion at the State House. And we're also very pleased to be joined today by Matt Cota, who is the executive director of the Vermont Fuel Dealers Association, which is a nonprofit trade organization of energy businesses around the state. Mr. Cota, great to have you with us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Really appreciate you all making the time for this conversation today, which, as I said, is going to probably center around the clean heat standard. And to get us started on that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to my co-host here, Don Keelan, who's going to get us started on this. Take it away, Don.
Thank you, Andrew. There's been a great deal of press put out over House Bill 715. And Laura, maybe you can tell us what that is. It's referred to as a clean heat standard. And could you give us a sort of a snapshot of what that entails? And then, Matt, I'm going to ask you if you could follow up. Is that your understanding of the act?
Great. Well, thank you so much, Don. House Bill 715, it did start in our committee, the Energy and Technology Committee in the House. And it has come about as a result of work that was done as part of the Global Warming Solutions Act, which that's a bill that was passed 2 years ago that put into statute mandatory emissions reductions for the state of Vermont and established a climate council, which will help us come up with a plan that can get to those emissions reductions. This was one of the biggest findings, the need to reduce emissions in transportation or in heat. Those are really the two places that we can look to lower our emissions. There was a multi-state effort around transportation that was in motion that is no longer in motion, and so that meant the clean heat standard kind of bumped up to number one in terms of opportunities that might help us meet those emissions goals. Clean heat standard will require our fossil fuel dealers most of them, probably 80% of them, to purchase and retire clean heat standards, clean heat credits, end of the day on Friday. Those are either earned or purchased through measures that reduce fossil fuel usage for fossil fuel dealers' customers. So customers are not obligated, but we're looking for weatherization measures or adding heat pump to heating to your existing fossil fuel or wood burning stove, or perhaps using blended fuels could earn credits towards this. And so with the volatility that we see with the global pricing of oil, we've seen a pretty huge spike in the last year with nothing happening here in Vermont. No clean heat standard, no additional regulations. This is a commodity that is really, the pricing is not in our control. And so for me, I see moving to the clean heat standard as something that will help us manage a transition away from fossil fuels that has already begun and is really volatile. And it will engage our fossil fuel dealers, our residents, our government officials, and other interested parties in the process. And that is, I guess, a super high level.
Matt, could you give us your take on the clean heat standard, or I say Act 715, but House 715?
Representative Sabilia had it exactly right. The Clean Heat Standard is a performance standard, something that has never been required for sellers of heating oil, kerosene, coal, or propane. And what the Clean Heat Standard does is tell us, those that sell these products, we want you to sell less of them, and we want you to transform your businesses so that you are doing services and fuels that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, so the state can better able meet the mandates that are in the 2020 Global Warming Solutions Act that require a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So in many ways, it provides an opportunity for companies that are already in the business of selling wood pellets. They're selling biofuel. They're installing cold climate heat pump. They're installing more efficient boilers and furnaces that use fossil fuel but use less of it. For those companies, this might actually provide an opportunity, because it is essentially the government rewarding you by giving you credits for things that you already do that help your customer reduce their energy burden and reduce their impact on climate change. So that's something that when the discussion started last summer, we didn't hang up the phone. We said, tell us more. Let's talk about it. The risk, of course, is all the details that happen after this bill, if this bill becomes law. Because what has happened in Representative Sabilia's committee and what's happening right now in the Senate Energy Committee, and will eventually be voted on the Senate floor in a couple of weeks, is an outline of a process that the government wants the Public Utility Commission, the entity that currently regulates the electric utilities and the natural gas utilities, to start. And that's going to be a 2-year process, an intensive process in which they'll be asked to do something that they've never done before, which is to figure out who sells heating oil and propane in Vermont, how much they purchase, where they purchase it from, and who they sell it to. And then they'll also simultaneously have to devise a credit system in which they'll determine what a ton of wood pellets is worth for credits as its effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They'll be asked, well, what does a gallon of biodiesel mean? Well, that depends on where the biodiesel comes from. What about a cold climate heat pump? What's the credit value of someone who installs a cold climate heat pump? What's the credit value attributed to someone that does a whole home weatherization? What about a partial weatherization? That's a ton of work. And the PUC says they're up for it. But my concern is, number one, that once we start the public utility process, if this bill becomes law, that those that sell the products or services that devote the most resources to this regulatory process in which we assign credit values will have their service or their product win in the end of the day. I'm nervous about that process because it's something that we have never been involved in. We've never been involved in a Public Utility Commission rule proceeding like this, not unlike the natural gas or the electric utilities. Second, I'm worried about enforcement. Unlike gasoline, so they've had low carbon fuels in Oregon and California and Washington State. And that's gasoline that moves from a refinery in California to a bulk plant in California to a tank underground in California that's sold to cars in California. And that the enforcement is pretty well thought out. We're different in Vermont. We've got kerosene and heating oil and propane that is delivered all across, crosses the border 2 or 3 times a day. We've got a third of our fuel, of our heating oil, comes from Quebec City, gets on a rail car, and then goes to 3 terminals in Vermont and 1 terminal in New Hampshire. 4 different wholesalers for just that one supply source. Then you've got Albany, which has over 6 wholesalers. You've got Springfield, Massachusetts with 3. Then you've got Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And if we can't get the fuel there, then we'll go to Revere, Massachusetts, or we'll go to New Hampton. And that's just heating oil. We sell another 100 million gallons. We sell 100 million gallons of heating oil, 100 million gallons of propane in Vermont. There's only 2 wholesalers in Vermont, terminal operators. One of those terminal operators in Rockingham, Vermont, has 5 different wholesalers that flows their propane through there. But most people on Rutland County are getting their fuel in Hampton. Is your brain starting to hurt? The problem is I know this because I've been doing this for 15 years. My people know this because they've been doing it, some of them their families have been doing it for 100 years. The PUC doesn't know what's to come. And that's my big concern. So one of the things that we asked for, and we had a disagreement with Representative Sabilia and her committee, but it was a civil disagreement, which is whether or not they can grasp this. We're trusting on this bill that passed the House that they're going to understand it, they're going to figure it all out, and they're going to be able to enforce it so that the honest taxpayer, the honest fuel dealer, isn't underpriced by those that can get away with not paying for these credits. Okay. However, what if they can't? If they can't, the impact on those that are participating in this process, that do want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions for their customers, that do want to do the right thing, are undercut by someone who is essentially an unenforced, that they can't enforce the law to. And that could have a disruptive effect on the market. And we're not talking about a luxury item. Heating oil, propane, and kerosene in this cold rural state is a necessity. It's not a luxury. If the PUC can't get it right, and there's no ability for the legislature to stop it, to hit pause because they haven't figured out who sells fuel in Vermont, well, I'm concerned.
This legislation, I think we all agree, is so complex. And as Matt was mentioning, it's never been done before. And it's going to have some major ramifications. What I had suggested, and I'll tell you in a minute who has agreed now to thinking it's a great idea, and that is to use the town of Arlington as a model on paper, not to spend any money doing anything down here other than creating a feasibility model, a pro forma, if you will, that has the 900 homes in Arlington converted to heat pumps or alternate fuel, to have the homes in Arlington, businesses in Arlington, and government buildings weatherized, and to have the grid system from Green Mountain Power converted that it can handle the loads that are going to come through, the electric loads that are going to be required, and also have the homes and the 2 service stations we have here converted to handle electric vehicle charging stations, both at the home level and at the businesses and at the 2 gas stations we have. And I would like to see what would this look like as a model that may flush out what the real issues are, not only in cost, but in the feasibility of being able to meet the goals of the Clean Heat Standard Act, or not the Clean Heat Standard Act, but of the Global Solutions Act of 2025 and 2030. Because frankly, I don't see us being able to come anywhere near that, given the shortage of labor that we have right now and the shortage of a supply chain interruption. And let me add one more thing. If you think this is crazy, go back 11 years when Governor Shumlin created a feasibility study to determine whether the state should have single payer or universal health care. And it turned out, after a very extensive study, which was very costly, by the way, it was not feasible. So my idea is not that it's the first time we're going to try it. And I think if we adopted what was the thinking from back then, that, you know, when we make a major change like we're planning on now, why not create a model first and use the town of Arlington as that model?
So using the town of Arlington as a model. So developing the clean heat standard is we're actually creating, let's take a step back. We are taking an unregulated commodity, oil, and we are creating a regulated market. That's essentially what the clean heat standard is doing. And the outcome, the expected outcome, the desired outcome of creating a regulated market for this with incentives to reduce fossil fuel usage is reduced emissions. We do have a model for this in Vermont. It is our renewable energy standard, which looks at our regulated electric system. And a number of years ago, we required our electric utilities to reduce their fossil fuel usage, help their customers reduce their fossil fuel usage. So reduce their own, help their customers reduce theirs, et cetera. And so we've seen how that goes. We were able to develop that. Again, that was a regulated entity. Our electric utilities are already regulated, unlike our fossil fuel folks. And we were able to develop that, and we have made changes to that along the way. They are very engaging and contentious, full contact events to change it. But when you are creating new systems and in regulated markets to change critical things like electricity or how we heat, you would expect that would be something that folks would bring a lot of passion to, a lot of questions towards. So, how could we model this in Arlington? I'd like to see the clean heat standard developed and modeled. We have a 2.5-year process to develop the clean heat standard before we actually implement it. I think modeling what we're seeing for the town of Arlington would be a great idea. Probably in about 12 to 14 months, starting to. Okay, well, what would this look like? Who are the fossil fuel dealers? We have a technical advisory group that's going to tell us, as Matt said, how much these credits are worth depending on the types of heating fuel that we are looking at. How is this going to affect low and moderate fixed income folks? Who are the fuel dealers here? How are they going to be impacted? Who are the other providers of heat here, and how are they going to be impacted? And so I guess that's kind of that's my response to it. Love to see a model in Arlington. I think it might be a little bit early. We need to look at how do we regulate and that process, as I said, will happen over 2.5 years. Deliberately will engage the fossil fuel dealers. It deliberately sets up these several expert working groups, a scientific technical advisory group, a low and moderate income group, looks at bringing folks together. This process, the commissioner of the Department of Public Service, felt that the public process for the Global Warming Solutions Act, bringing forth the initial climate action plan, was not robust enough in terms of getting out to folks. She had several suggestions for ways to really dig in and make sure we're talking with Vermonters. We put in place this thing called deliberative polling as part of this, literally saying, Matt, let's gather with a number of your folks and tell them what we're finding and see what they tell us that's going to do to their bit. If we move in this direction, what we think is the right way, how's that going to impact you? How's that going to impact your customers, et cetera? So,
Matt, you want to respond to the model?
Yeah.
Again, we don't have that much.
I like your idea of the Arlington experiment, but I would go the other way. Look, we have a couple of different cap and trade, cap and invest programs, different performance standard programs that are out there. The biggest one, the longest one, is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is for the power producers to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. What happened there is Vermont joined and waited for the others to come along. It's a regional program that makes a lot of sense because where electricity is moving across state lines. When they designed the Transportation Climate Initiative, which has not been implemented, but it's still a thing, it took at least 5 years, maybe more, to figure out how, because fuel flows freely across borders in such a compact area such as the Northeast, that they designed this program to be a regional program because the state going it alone would have problems. A clean heat standard perhaps should follow the same approach. As it's not like Vermont is alone with all of these objectives and goals and mandates to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They have them in New York, and New Jersey, and Connecticut, and Massachusetts. These same types of programs, if every program has a different flavor and biodiesel here gets credit over here, but this one doesn't, it's mandated over here, would make a whole lot more sense from a simplistic standpoint, from an enforcement standpoint, if it wasn't just a state program, and certainly not just an Arlington program, but a regional program, which we can ensure that our neighbors across the border, because the fuel is crossing the border. Much of the fuel that comes in from Vermont is not only, well, of course, it's not only coming because we don't have any refineries here in Vermont or any seaports, but it's also coming from trucks that freely cross the border at any hour of the day. So the idea that we should have one regulatory authority for a trucker that comes from Massachusetts into Vermont or Massachusetts into New York, it just makes a whole lot more sense rather than having a state approach and certainly not a town approach.
Let me follow up. By the way, I should point out to both of you that I've been working with Maura Collins. You may know her. She's the executive director of the Vermont Housing and Finance Agency, one of the $650 million nonprofit up in Burlington, I gather. And she thinks it's a positive idea, by the way. So I just passed that along. Representative Sabilia, one of the members of the Vermont Climate Council, Jared Duval, had mentioned that one of the goals is to stop Vermonters from having to send $1.5 billion out of state to buy fuel, and to keep it in state. And one of the things he mentioned was pellets, the use, have a greater use of pellets. Most of the pellets in Vermont that are used today come from out of state and from Canada. There's only one pellet company in Vermont, and that's in Clarendon, and they make approximately 15,000 tons a year. That's it. There are no other pellet companies. And the other thing is, the Green Mountain Power, our electric company that produces sells most of the power, they're a Canadian company. So why are we promoting keeping the money in the state when, in fact, most of it today goes out of state?
So, I mean, the whole point is to use less fossil fuels. And fossil fuel, we are not, we don't have oil wells here in Vermont. And so we are spending money, we are sending money, maybe we're sending it out west, likely we're sending it to the Middle East. As I said, at the top, it's not a commodity that we are affecting, impacting, controlling, affecting in any way the pricing of it. And so, Vermonters are paying, the same Vermonters with the same heat system and the same, need for heat this year over next year, or this year over last year, are paying $1,000 more than they were last year, and nothing has happened. And those are not dollars that, those dollars are leaving. Sure, they're going to one of Matt's members, perhaps, but Matt's members are sending it out. They have to purchase, they have to purchase the fuel themselves.
Yeah, it's a global commodity, and even though most of our propane and heating oil comes from Canada, if it's not from Canada, it's coming from America. That's just the way the fuel flows. It's clear that disruption in the Middle East or what's happening in Ukraine right now has an effect on the global price, even if not a drop of it is coming from Middle East or Russia. It's coming from Canada and Texas. But the point is the same. There's an increase in cost. There's a reaction to that often quoted a phrase about we're sending our money out. And, for someone who works in Arlington or Bellows Falls or Barrie and purchases a Buderus boiler or a Energy Connect boiler that's manufactured in New Jersey, slaps on a Beckett burner, which is manufactured in Ohio, and fills it with oil, fills a tank with oil that comes from Ohio or Texas. Yeah, it's not all coming from Vermont, but it's mostly an American product that uses American equipment that is delivered and serviced by someone in your town. And this hyperbole about sending our money out of state when you're buying a Mitsubishi heat pump from Japan, when you're paying a Canadian corporation that purchases most of their electricity from a hydro facility in Quebec, just doesn't ring true to us. Doesn't really affect us other than disappoint us when we hear it over and over again.
I just wanted to jump in because we're starting to run low on time here, and I did have two questions, two different questions I wanted to pose to each of you, and I'll ask them at the same time, if that's okay. To Representative Sabilia, I guess I wanted to ask you if you thought there was any concern about the impact of the clean heat standard on low-income Vermonters, if that's going to be something that there might, at some point along the way, be costs that a fuel dealer, let's say, might incur that would be transferred on to the customers, and if that's the case, is there some concern about how low-income Vermonters might be impacted? And to Matt, I wanted to ask you, once we hear from Laura, if the clean heat standard isn't the way to go with trying to reduce carbon emissions, what would your preferred alternative be instead of that? Maybe it's just leave things just status quo the way they are. But I guess I just wondered, if not the clean heat standard, then what might be a better way to approach it? But Representative Sabilia, let me come back to you with a question around the impact on low-income Vermonters.
Yeah, thanks very much, Andrew. That is actually a big priority for me when we're thinking about any number of critical services for Vermonters. As I said before, regular Vermonters are paying this year, on average, maybe $1,000 more than they were last year without us having done anything, which really points to the volatility in the market that exists. And so how do we as elected officials help bring some stability, some predictability to that situation? We know that fossil fuels are not good for our environment. And we know that this is a volatile market that is not good for our people. So how do we transition away in a way that adds some stability and predictability? And that is exactly the point of the clean heat standard. I will make no promises that there will be, that we know exactly what the pricing will be at this point, or how we will, or how that will affect low and moderate income folks. What I will say is we will be working on that. That's something that we will have control over in Vermont, looking at these models, providing feedback for these models, thinking about how do we bring resources to these models to offset the additional cost. No one's thinking about that $1,000. Too bad so sad. We say at my house, but folks this year that are paying extra fuel for extra costs for their heating, no one's thinking about that. That's precisely what we're trying to do here, is think about how do we do this in a way that is reliable, engages everyone, and is good for our future. Because this is going to happen anyway. Folks, one of the biggest things that I will hear over and over again, or the most common things that I hear over and over again, is it doesn't matter if Vermont reduces their emissions, in terms of climate change at all. Will make no difference. And, there are many people that would argue that point. I'm happy to give it to folks and say, let's say that that's true. There are places that are much more significant, their markets, the population, California, China, other large countries. When they make decisions to start reducing their emissions, that changes the market on any number of things. And, if we are not thinking about that, it's precisely our low income and rural Vermonters, my Vermonters, they get left behind. I've seen that here. I see comparisons to what has happened with the landline telephone, as things have been innovating and improving in some areas. Now we have really expensive problems for low income folks and rural folks that we have to try and solve. So let's not get to that place with heat.
Okay, and Matt, over to you then. What's the alternative to a clean heat standard?
Well, if we knew how this would work, or if we knew how to make this happen, it would have happened already, right? This is a complicated problem. I mean, we have 4 out of every 5 homes depends on fossil fuels in Vermont in order for heat, hot water, and cooking. And no one wants to use more of it. No one stops in our office and said, gee, I really enjoyed your product last night. Can I get more of it just for the heck of it? No. They will find out a way to use less. And we have slowly reduced it, but not with the speed or the demand that is required in the Global Warming Solutions Act. So that's going to take really quick action. So here are your policy buckets. I'm not saying a performance standard, which clean heat standard isn't the best of all the tools. I just have real concerns about the ability of the PUC to enforce it on a now unregulated industry. So I have big concerns about that. I have big concerns about a drop-in fuel that is now available and is readily being used in many areas to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, biodiesel, of which 43% of Vermonters use heating oil. It can be blended in. That will not be counted because there are those that oppose the use of renewable biogas, biomass, and biodiesel because it perpetuates our companies that drive in trucks and bring it to their house, even though it would be the fastest way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But I worry that in the regulatory process, it will be completely discounted and discontinued, and there won't be a path at all. So perhaps a clean heat standard is the best performance, but I'm not confident that it is. But what are your other alternatives? That's a very good question you asked, Andrew. Well, there are taxes, right? So tax the things that we don't want, use the money to fund the things that we do want. And if the policy decision is raise the cost of heating oil and propane and use the money so more people can weatherize their homes and install wood pellet stoves or electric heat, that's a policy choice. It has been rejected for the most part by the legislature because it is in fact a regressive tax in which the lowest income Vermonters can least afford a higher increase. Is there a way that you can resolve that? I don't know, but I'm sure there's some people thinking about it. How can we make a consumption tax less regressive? That's a policy conundrum. And then the last one at your disposal is a ban, which is happening in other areas, in which new constructions happening in the city of Burlington, in Brookline, Mass, in Quebec, in New York City, a ban on hookups of equipment that burns fossil fuels, whether it's for heating, for hot water, or cooking, and requiring those new buildings to heat electrically or with wood in order to ensure that those buildings don't continue to use fossil fuels for another 20, 30, 40, 50 years. That's the ban. The problem with that, from the Global Warming Solutions Act mandate, is that we don't build enough houses, or we don't tear down enough houses. We're not like California, where we tear down houses and build houses. Some houses are 50, 60, 70, 100, 200 years old. So that will, even though that may seem like a way that we can get rid of fossil fuels, in fact, it is not. It would be a very slow process in order to convert our entire housing stock. So you've got 3 different imperfect tools. I think the one that Representative Sabilia and the majority in the legislature chose is one that provides tremendous opportunity for those local heating, fuel, and heating service companies that are in the business of delivering lower carbon fuels and high efficiency services. Am I confident it will work? No. Am I worried about what will happen if it doesn't work? Yes.
Me too.
The office that Andrew and I are in right now, 4 years ago, we would burn, it's my office, by the way, 1,600 gallons of fuel a year. We put in a new furnace that had a close to a 90% efficiency rate. We replaced all 15 windows, and we put on a new roof, an insulated roof. We are down this year now. I will burn 400 gallons. A tremendous savings. Education, incentives, weatherization, I think are there. And I heard from my local fuel dealer, they've gone from 1,100 gallons per customer down to 750 throughout the southern Bennington County area where they distribute. If I tried to do this today, I would not be able to get the craftsmen to come in here and do this work. We just don't have them available. It's so difficult to call someone to come in to do weatherization. And I think the legislature should really be focusing on getting us more workforce people who can carry out the goals that are going to be required as we go forward, particularly in the weatherization and the conversion. Because right now, they're just not available.
Well, if I could say one thing and commend the Representative Sabilia and her committee and the legislature for recognizing, is that there is a tremendous amount of money, much of it from federal ARPA funds, that has been dedicated to weatherization. And Vermont funds weatherization at a higher level than most states, because there's a 2-cent fuel tax on heating oil propane that goes to fund our low-income weatherization. And we have a system, unlike other states, to deliver weatherization services. But you're right. There's 3 things that you need to make substantial change in public policy, right? So you need the demand. Well, the demand is the high prices. High prices, creates a demand to lower your fuel bills, right? And then you got to have the money. Well, actually, we have the money thanks to federal ARPA funds. We have a tremendous amount of money that can be dedicated to this. And then the third thing you need is the capacity. And the capacity is the workforce, which, Don, you've correctly identified. We do not have. How do we get it? I know Representative Sabilia and Governor Scott have been working on that quite a bit, and it is a challenge. In addition to doing what I do, my hobby job is I'm on the South Burlington City Council, and we have a tremendous city that has underground natural gas pipes and underground electricity and plenty of sewer and water capacity, plenty of room to build, and we still have a lot of trouble siting new housing developments in areas of Vermont where they don't have the sewer and water capacity, and where people don't want new houses. It's also very, I point a 7 Days article, cover story. It was a brilliant cover story talking about the troubles with how we solve this housing crisis, how we solve this workforce crisis if we don't resolve our planning and zoning crisis. And that's something that goes beyond energy, but is vitally important, because we need weatherization workers, we need delivery drivers, we need plumbers, we need electricians, we need heat techs, we need grocery clerks, we need restaurant workers. And I don't need to tell that to Laura, because she's been one of the strongest advocates for workforce development, economic development in your area. But I don't know how to solve that problem, but we need to solve it.
Well, I'm sorry, Representative Sabilia, do you want to respond?
No, I would agree. And I also would just like to make sure that we're really clear, Don, all the measures that you took are measures that would potentially be eligible clean heat credits. as part of this new market. So,
Well,
Well, thank
oh, I'm sorry, Don. It'll
No,
be
no,
great
thank
when
you.
we're back in the same room again. We won't be interrupting each other. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Andrew. No, I just want to thank our guests for being with us today, and thank you for serving.
Right, indeed, and I will certainly second that. Thank you both very much for your time today. I really appreciate that. And unfortunately, we're going to have to leave this here. I think we could probably have another, well, nearly 40-minute long conversation about some of the deeper weeds of all of this. It's really quite an interesting subject. Just before we go, Representative Sabilia, I understand the bill is currently in the state Senate. They are working on it. It's going to go to a vote there, and then presumably, if they pass it out, it'll come back before the full General Assembly or House of Representatives, and then you'll send it along to the governor.
exactly. It's in Senate Natural Resources right now and is expected to go to Senate Appropriations and then to the Senate floor. And depending on what happens, the House will either concur with the changes that the Senate has made or, seek to improve upon them or come to some sort of agreement, and then it would go to the governor.
All right. Well, we'll be following along to see how that plays out. But again, thank you both for a really interesting conversation. Representative Laura Sabilia, the state representative from Dover, Searsburg, Wardsboro, Stamford, Somerset, and Reedsburg. Well, that's a lot of territory. And Matt Cota, the executive director of the Vermont Fuel Dealers Association. I want to thank you both for taking the time to be with us today. And have a good weekend. Thank you again. And
Thank you.
We'll talk to you again soon.